of everything in here. Why the map?
It's the biggest treasure that's never been found.
5 billion easy.
But it's just a story.
I beg to differ.
Do you love Tomb Raider but you hate women? Well boy, have I got the film for you, because at long last Sony have given us Uncharted, starring Tom Holland as Nathan Drake. Because if there's two things Sony Pictures loves, it's Spider-Man and pissing off the internet. Finally, after years of development and delays, we have an Uncharted movie. I mean, God, it's taken a long time. It's taken so long that Mark Wahlberg went from being the young lead to now being the old mentor figure. I mean, when this first entered development, Tom Holland was in diapers, and now he's nearly able to see a PG-13 film by himself. 4 years, that's how much younger he is than me. Where did it all go wrong? Anyway, my point is that an Uncharted movie has been in development for a long, long time, and it's arguably coming at a time when the hype for the series is at an all-time low, and given the fact that video game movies are a mixed bag at the best of times, this surely had a lot to overcome. So does it. Let me start by saying I love the Uncharted games. I've played through all of them multiple times. I genuinely think it's one of the best video game franchises ever. But the problem with an Uncharted movie for me was always that, firstly, it's a very cinematic video game already, so what do you really gain in bringing it to the big screen? And secondly, was the fact that it's not exactly the most original IP. It certainly owes a lot to Tomb Raider and of course Indiana Jones, but when you're playing it, that originality factor doesn't really matter. It feels just fresh enough to get some enjoyment out of it. It doesn't feel too derivative. It feels like it's kind of been redone for a new generation. So going into an Uncharted film, I sort of had two hopes, and one was that it retained the scale and scope of the games, and also that it felt like something relatively new and worthwhile in adapting, which are obviously two very big and demanding asks. Going into this, there was a lot of fan concern over casting and whether this would actually be faithful to the games or not. I mean, let's be honest, Tom Holland is great and all, but I don't think anyone pictured him as Nathan Drake, and it's also billed as a prequel to the games, which it really isn't. There's plenty of discrepancies here between the games timeline and the movie timeline, and also just the fact that it feels more like an origin to this version of the character, which is to say, it doesn't feel like the Nathan Drake from the games all that much. But fans might be able to overlook that with all the Easter eggs and nods to the source material. That being said, it is kind of hilarious how they respond to Mustache Gate in this, which is basically, hey, let's film a post-credit scene with Sully having a mustache so we can fool people with the marketing. Well played, Sony. That being said, if you are able to overlook those shortcomings as a fan of the material, you might just be rewarded. Tom Holland was met with a lot of derision when he was cast as Nathan Drake, and it's not really that surprising. He just seems very young. Wouldn't be the first time that Drake went young. Fuck that guy. The point is that, even though it's a prequel, it felt like the studio was sort of casting for the actor as opposed to the character. I like Tom Holland, I just didn't really see him as Drake. And I still think that's kind of true, but I will say I was able to kind of reason enough with myself that this is a younger Drake, one we only spent a really short amount of time with in the game, and as such, maybe he's on the way to becoming the character we know. And as such, the characterization didn't really bother me. His performance is totally fine. He's charismatic, as you would expect from Tom Holland, and he certainly has a sarcastic wit of a Nathan Drake down. But this is what I would call a Chris Pratt performance. I like Chris Pratt. He plays himself in everything. Therefore, I like his performances. Kind of feels the same here with Tom Holland. It doesn't feel like a stretch for him as an actor. I couldn't, for example, distinguish between his Spider-Man or his Nathan Drake, but I like those characters, and I think he did fine in the role. Man, Chris Pratt would have been a good choice for this, actually. I think they really cast Tom Holland because he's a hit with younger audiences, and I certainly feel like this movie is going to be a hit with teenage girls, because there's a lot of, how do I say this delicately? Beefcake shots? It seems like Tom Holland is in a constant state of putting on a shirt, or getting a shirt wet, or popping that shirt off. I'm not complaining, I'm just saying. Mark Wahlberg also wasn't exactly welcomed when he was cast as Victor Sully Sullivan, but I don't know, I kind of liked him here. Same problem here that I had with Tom Holland, which is that he plays himself. That's Mark Wahlberg there, and he sure is being Mark Wahlberg. But I don't know, I actually enjoyed him in this, even though I'm not really a Marky Mark fan. But I don't know, he was funny and snarky in a way that Sully is, and he said kid a lot, so that ticks a couple of boxes there. And yeah, it feels like they even gave him a few Nathan Drake-y moments, as if to say, sorry, the film took so long, dude, here's your chance to be Nathan Drake. Surprisingly though, he never pops his shirt off. Surprisingly though, surprisingly, his chemistry with Tom Holland is actually pretty good, as I was saying. The rest of the cast is pretty unremarkable, and that's not to say they're bad. They serve their purpose. I mean, we have Sophia Ali as Chloe. I like Chloe. I thought she played well off the others. We have Antonio Banderas, who was less pivotal to the story than I expected. And then we have his sidekick, Mercenary, played by Tati Gabrielle. Yeah, she was fine. I mean, it feels like no one really tried to give a great performance, and I don't know. Maybe the material didn't warrant it. I don't know. Maybe the writing wasn't great. I don't know. But yeah, it kind of feels like a CW show with all these young, attractive people running around. And it certainly feels like that's the audience they were aiming for as well. And yeah, none of them popped their shirts off. It's getting weird. The other side of Uncharted, though, of course, is the action. And I was pretty satisfied with the action in this. I mean, there's a few gunfights and a few fist fights and a tiny bit of chasing and a little bit of climbing. I mean, it doesn't really feel like the games, though. There's not like a lot of high-stakes climbing or intense gun battles. It feels like there is a tiny bit of that stuff, but it's mostly perfunctory, as if to say, hey, we did include that stuff, see? But that being said, there was enough good moments in the action that it was redeemable, and certainly I always found it engaging. The unquestionable highlight of the action, though, is the set piece at the end of the film, where it really does feel like they managed to achieve the scale the series is known for. It was just ludicrous and fun and pretty inventive and just felt massive compared to the rest of the film. It feels like, if only fleetingly there, it was really like watching an Uncharted movie. And when that's at the end of your film, it's kind of hard not to want more of these, because it feels like, if only for a second there, they really did figure it out. I will say the rest of the film kind of looks a little bit cheap at times, and it certainly feels very contained. It feels like sometimes actors are very far away from where they were filmed, and I don't know if that was COVID or what, but it's kind of a shame, because it does feel like when it breaks out of that mold, the film really can deliver. The movie does excel at some of the smaller elements though. The treasure hunting, the tomb raiding, and the puzzles are all present and pretty decent. In fact, one of the highlights of the movie is in the middle, where they raid an ancient tomb, and it really does work. I would say the story is pretty basic, but I think the Uncharted games, at least some of them, are guilty of the same. It's very MacGuffin focused with a few twists here and there. And I will admit, there were a few twists and revelations that actually caught me off guard in the Uncharted movie. There are some eye-rolling moments though. There's a lot of jokes, some of which really missed the mark. There's a scene that's prominently set in a Papa John's, and if that doesn't remind you it's a Sony movie, all the Sony products being front and centre surely will. There's some things that don't make a lot of sense that you could definitely nitpick, but I've never really been a nitpicky person when it comes to movies. And yeah, it does feel at times like the characters act because they need to drive the plot forward, as opposed to how a character or a person would actually act. But at the same time, it did keep the plot moving and kept the movie feeling relatively breezy and well paced. Overall, the Uncharted film isn't the slam dunk it could have been, but neither is it the embarrassing failure that so many other video game movies are. If you're a fan of the series and can overlook some of the unfaithful aspects, you might just find a fun, if not wholly original, adventure film as your reward. The cast is charismatic and likeable, even if they deliver some relatively token performances in the film, and the action has its moments where it shows genuine promise and excellence. But even at its worst, it is still pretty engaging, if not always fresh and entertaining. I will say it's probably one of the better video game movies, and even though that's pretty faint praise, the highest praise I can give the film is that I'd watch another one of these, and dare I say, actually want another one of these. It's not a solid gold hit, but certainly it's a diamond, and admittedly, quite a bit of rough. Why don't you pop that shirt off right now?